Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Hi, this is Dr. Navi Babulal, and you're listening to The Green Scene, which is aired Saturday at 11 a.m. on Bobo 89.1 FM.
Welcome to The Green Scene, hosted by the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center. My name is Gladys Hislop, curator for terrestrial exhibits and education programs at the Turtle Center, and today's topic is climate change. And with me this morning, we have a couple special guests to help us discuss this topic. We have Ms. Lisa Hurlston-McKenzie. She's the Senior Policy Advisor for Environment and Resiliency in the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency. And we have also Mr. Tim Austin. He's a Deputy Director for Research and Assessment in the Department of Environment. Throughout this series, we explore topics related to conservation here in the Cayman Islands, and including protecting our natural environment, preserving culture and heritage, and talking about sea turtles and other native species. If you have missed any episodes and you'd like to see them again, you can catch them, the replays, on our YouTube channel. But today's show is about climate change. So, Lisa and Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, good. Well, let's get right into it. So, can you guys, or one of you guys, tell me, what is climate change? What is that all about? Because we hear about climate change, global warming, weather. Can you give us a definition or for the audience?
Absolutely. So in terms of climate change and weather, weather is what we have on a day-to-day basis. You know, how the weather changes from hour to hour and throughout a 24-hour cycle. So whether it's going to rain today or tomorrow, or maybe even perhaps rain in the next few days or become drier in the next few days. Climate looks at that weather data over a 30-year period and determines trends. So how much has it rained during that 30-year period?
Okay.
Is it getting drier? How have the temperatures on a day-to-day basis or even nighttime temperatures changed in that 30-year period? So that's basically the difference between weather and climate. In terms of climate change, so we're looking more at those climatic trends over that 30-year period and going back even hundreds to thousands of years, depending on what type of data we use to assess climate change. But basically, when we talk about climate change, or when you hear most people talking about climate change, they're talking about human-caused climate change. And that's typically also the definition that's used in the Climate Change Convention. If anybody's heard of the United Nations Framework for Climate Change, they're really more concerned less about the natural climatic changes and natural climate variability, although it is recognized that there are natural processes that have been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, even millennia. But when we talk about climate change and what people can do in order to help slow climate change or even arrest climate change, we're really talking about the human causes of climate change.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize it was that long of a period. Wow. So, well, you did say something interesting that some people might pick up on. You said arrest climate change. That's even possible. So that's something hopeful to look forward to. So can you tell me the role of the ministry? We have a brand new ministry with a really impressive title of climate resiliency. What does that mean? And I guess Tim can come in and bring in his role in the DOE, how DOE fits into that.
Sure. Well, like you said, the ministry is a fairly new ministry as of the last election. I believe its birth date is something like the 26th of April, 2021, so just after Earth Day of 2021. And essentially, the role of the ministry is to deliver government's commitments in the space of the environment, social and economic balance, to bring those focus points to all of government's decision making when it comes to what they plan to deliver from the strategic statement, policy statement that the government puts out each year as it relates to the budget, but just also in terms of day-to-day decisions that government makes through its policies or through cabinet decisions, and to ensure that adequate advice on those things related to the environment, related to socioeconomic development, has environmental and climate change considerations baked in to build our overall resiliency in this country.
Oh, well, that's important for a small country like this, yes. And Tim, how does the DOE fit into this?
So happy to talk about that for a while. The DOE obviously been around a lot longer than the ministry, although we fall under that ministry and helping achieve some of the tasks that Lisa just mentioned. But the DOE, the name of the Department of Environment was 1986 was the department was formed, but it had been around in various different variations since prior to that.
I remember Natural Resources.
The Natural Resources Protection and Conservation Unit, it had a number of names, but primarily the role is to look after the natural resources of the Cayman Islands, the terrestrial and the marine. Focusing on conservation and management. We also have a regulatory function under the National Conservation Act. There are a number of kind of laws and stuff that need to be followed, so we're responsible for marine park and terrestrial protected area monitoring and any other various kind of resource monitoring that's required around the island, including the scientific side, which is the section that we head up mostly. And then, of course, we have the National Conservation Council under the National Conservation Act 2013, and there are the statutory board that's formed, and the DOE is delegated a lot of the functions of that council, looking after the kind of ambitions of that council, so that takes up a lot of time. And then, of course, we have under the National Conservation Act, there's a requirement to consult for entities that are giving permission. So we do a lot of kind of in-house reviews of applications that are being made, particularly planning and coastal works, but other applications. So we've kind of got a varied amount of tasks to get on with, but all surrounding making the right decisions for looking after the terrestrial and marine protected areas and our environment generally.
Oh wow, that's a big list. That's a lot. Okay, well, so where do we go? The ministry, Lisa, your role, you outlined the role, so how does that actually play out? How does that affect the rest of the government services, for example?
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, the ministry, continues its function as it did when it was a ministry solely of environment, but we now have climate resiliency in our name, and we do just that. We try and, as Tim said, advise for decisions that are made at a pay grade higher than ours, in terms of climate resiliency and in terms of environmental sustainability. So that is essentially the function of the ministry, is to help advise at that level, but also across the board. So we do get requests to advise other ministries and other departments under other ministries when it comes to environmental sustainability, as well as socioeconomic issues, more often now as they pertain to climate change and climate risk. And we're very fortunate that we've had some assistance from the UK government most recently to help us understand what our climate risks are in the Cayman Islands and be able to start to better advise our fellow civil servants in other ministries and other departments when they submit these types of requests to us, particularly when they're looking at their own sectoral plans and policies and how to update them with climate change considerations in mind. So we're very fortunate that we have an experienced team at the Department of Environment, plus the other agencies that fall under our ministry, which would be the National Weather Services, as well as Hazard Management Cayman Islands. And all of those three agencies, as well as the ministry, have formed since last year a technical working group that has put together this climate change policy that we might be able to talk about a little bit later on, as well as to try to be able to advise other client services within the civil service, but also within the private sector as well, who ask us various questions about climate change in the Cayman Islands, climate change impacts that we've seen or evidence thereof, and also, what the Cayman Islands government plans to do about adapting to climate change and mitigating our risks in various different ways. So it's a big responsibility of the ministry, but we're taking it on and we're tackling it as best as we can, and pushing out what we hope is useful policies and helpful advice.
Okay, well, that was great, guys. Thanks for sharing that with us. So we know where we stand. We have an idea of what the ministry does and how DOE fits into it. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we can delve a little bit more into the topic. We're discussing climate change here on the Green Scene, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Did you know that turtles play an important role in ocean ecosystems? Turtles maintain healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs, providing key habitat for other marine life and helping to balance marine food webs and nutrient cycling. Learn more about our turtle friends at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a Cayman parrot at the Cayman Turtle Center. I was rescued and love my home here. Did you know our human friends at the center breed and raise Cayman parrots, the national bird of the Cayman Islands, then release them to live in the wild? Come visit me and my bird friends at Cayman Turtle Center.
Hey, welcome back to the Green Scene. My name is Geddes Hislop, and we're here discussing climate change. We're joined by Lisa Hurlston McKenzie from the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, and Deputy Director of the Department of Environment, Mr. Tim Austin. Also on the panel here, we have our Education Officer, Ms. Shauna McGill, sitting on the side. Yeah, so earlier we discussed the role of the Ministry and the Department of Environment in the government's approach to climate change. So let's talk about climate change itself. What are some of the effects that we're seeing with climate? People see it on a global basis, I guess floods and hurricanes and all that kind of stuff. What kind of things are we seeing here in the Cayman Islands, and what signs directly are we looking for?
I'm happy to have a go at that. So for most people, and the biggest thing about climate change is the fact that the planet is warming up. It's getting hotter. People notice that on a day-to-day basis, but that change in temperature has far-reaching effects through a lot of ecosystems, a lot of world functions. So as things get hotter, so the weather patterns are influenced or changed. In particular, one thing around Cayman that we see a lot is elevated sea temperatures. So the temperature of the ocean has been getting hotter and hotter, and most of you will be aware that that the sea makes up 70% of the global planet, so it absorbs a lot of the excess heat that's being produced. And that is changing things that in the ecosystem, particularly around Cayman. We have coral reefs that are adapted to the climate that's it's been for the last 10,000 years, and that climate is very close to their upper threshold at the moment. And as the water warms, so it becomes too warm for the corals in the summer months, and we see a lot of coral bleaching. So that was probably one of the very earliest indicators of coral bleaching, of climate change that I was introduced to. In 1998, we had a mass global. 1998 was a coral bleaching event that really impacted Cayman. A lot of the reefs, they call it coral bleaching because the coral itself turns white during one of these heat stress events. Basically, when the water gets above 31 degrees for any length of time, we see coral bleaching occur. But there are loads of other areas where the increase in temperature is affecting things. We're seeing the sea level rise as an ocean gets warmer, so it expands. So that the sea level is rising as a result of thermal expansion, but also the warmer temperatures are melting the polar ice cap. So we're seeing lots of fresh water being put into the system. We're seeing glaciers that are retreating, and all that excess water is going into the ocean, which equates to sea level rise. It's small, I think estimated 3 millimeters a year. But that's a big change when it happens over a long period of time in what is ostensibly a very short period of time for the planet. So as Lisa mentioned before, climate change, the climates have been changing. They do change under the natural cycles of interglacial or glacial periods, and we're just seeing that this. But at the moment, the issue is the rate at which that is happening. As Lisa said, the human-induced impact, the release of CO2, is resulting in the climate changing much faster than it ever has before, and the ability of the planet to keep up with that, or the ecosystems to keep up with that, is being challenged. So as sea level rise here, we see beach erosion. We're seeing changes, I think, also in rainfall patterns around the Caribbean. Lisa can help me here, but I think that the situation is that we're going to be actually a drier climate as a result of the warmer temperatures, but we're going to see increased periods of really intense rainfall. So flash flooding is likely to go. So when it rains really hard for a short period of time, and then doesn't rain again. And that's terrible in terms of water lens recharging. The water doesn't get a chance to drain into the ground. The slow, steady rains, much more beneficial at topping up water lenses and keeping the systems kind of fresh with water that they need. So these changes are having implications on the ecosystems, the forests. Water table is rising, the freshwater lenses are rising as a result of sea level rising. That's changing the depth to which plant roots can go. So we're seeing likely to see shifts in the kind of the floral coverage of Cayman. So the forests and the dry shrubland areas are all going to change perhaps to wetlands. So we're expecting to see these kind of transitions. But right now, for us, the most immediate thing that we see is the coral reef bleaching. And that all sounds a bit doomsday, but there are a lot more implications than that. There's also ocean acidification. As the oceans increase their levels of CO2, the pH is dropping, meaning that the ocean is becoming more acidic. And as everybody knows, acid likes to dissolve things, particularly calcium carbonate, which is corals are made up of, and much of the island is limestone. So we're seeing a great propensity for reefs to become much more brittle as they dissolve. And similarly, creatures aren't able to lay down their calcareous skeletons. So, there are implications that we just simply don't understand or know a lot about yet, but are really quite frightening in terms of their implications for Cayman, particularly, but globally, of course.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I think people don't realize the far-reaching implications, because most people, I think, are above water, and all they see is it's getting really hot or they get floods. But yeah, that was well put, because things like they're affecting our reefs directly. That's, in a sense, cutting into people's pockets. And that's really what we want people to understand, that this song affects us. It's not just a matter of you turn on your AC and a little higher and you get away from it. But there's more to it. There's more to it than that. Oh, so what is some of the other implications you might see from maybe Lisa can help from from the socioeconomic impact of climate change? What kind of things these are things that people probably don't think about. But what else can we consider?
Well, several things. As Tim mentioned, just in terms of the air temperature, that has an implication for crops and livestock and human beings in terms of health of all of those things. Obviously, heat stress for all of those things, and whether we are adapting to that quick enough as fast as those temperatures are rising. We've had at least a 2.2 or 2.3 degree addition to our annual temperature overall in the last 25 to 30 years. It does, as Tim says, it doesn't sound like much, but year upon year that has an effect, particularly on vulnerable groups that may not be well adapted to those increasing temperatures. Like you said, people that may not have air conditioning in their homes or schools, and is that affecting people? From a health perspective, those that have respiratory issues in particular, there's cost implications to our healthcare system and to health insurance. There are all of these knock-on effects just from that one thing. In terms of agriculture, our the crops that we're currently growing, are they able to adapt to these hotter and hotter temperatures? Or are our irrigation systems able to keep a pace with some of these crops that are, requiring water resources that, as Tim said, may not be replenished as naturally at a rate as farmers have been used to before, because the rainfall is simply not there to recharge some of these natural aquifers. So is potable water necessary in terms of its production and its use in these areas of the economy? And that has a cost implication for farmers, commercial farmers, but as well as just you and me and backyard farmers that just like to grow things just to sustain our families, or just as a recreational activity on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, or over the course of a year. And are they seeing that they might have to be changing some of the things that they typically used to grow, say 5, 10, 15 years ago, or that they recall their grandparents growing a generation before, that we simply are having much more difficulty in growing now, either as a result of the high temperatures or lack of water, or maybe some types of diseases that the plants are becoming susceptible to on a more regular basis, whether it's some type of insect infestation or mold or something. I'm not a farmer, obviously, but these are the types of things that we're seeing around the region, but perhaps here too, that is becoming more problematic for people, and for people in that particular sector. But also, as Tim mentioned before, the issue of flooding, a real problem in many districts across Grand Cayman in particular, but perhaps also in the sister islands, and not just when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes, because we sort of anticipate that we'll be having issues in low-lying areas when we have those types of events. But on a more regular basis, when we do have those rainfall events, the rain comes at a much more intense, a faster rate than they used to come before. And the areas where perhaps this rainfall used to run to or accumulate in are either now built up as a result of our development, or for some reason the wetland areas that used to act as sort of sinks or sponges to these areas are compromised because they're perhaps not as large as they used to be, or are compromised for other reasons. So that creates, a knock-on effect in terms of our stormwater management on a site basis, and even on a neighborhood basis, and then on a more regional basis in terms of these water catchment areas. So it has a lot of different implications, and these are the types of things that we hope the climate change policy will address more broadly, but also that we hope that people will take into consideration when they're thinking about where they wish to build their homes, or if they have homes already built, what they might need to be doing to make them a lot more resilient to these hazards in the future that we know are probably only going to get worse if we don't address them now, versus leaving them till later when they might be much more costly on an individual basis, on a household basis, on a business basis, as well as at the national level.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's so many implications, not just in the physical, as you mentioned, the socioeconomic side of it, but coming back to the environmental side of it. Tim, what are some of the other signs of climate change that people can see, effects of climate change that people can see around Cayman?
So I think probably there are some really classic examples that people hold up for climate change. Obviously, a sea level rise is a big thing. As we mentioned before, it's not something that's easy to notice or indeed to measure. But one of the effects of sea level rise is a shift in the coastline. And for Cayman that has beaches or has rubbly shorelines, we're seeing that. So at the moment, the southern end of 7 Mile Beach is really suffering as a result of huge amounts of beach erosion. Now, some of that is to do with planning decisions and or infrastructure that's been placed on the active beach quite inappropriately, but it's exacerbated by climate change. The increase in sea level rise has meant that the sea is encroaching further inland, and when the beach has no place to adjust itself, so we're seeing what is beach erosion, and that is a pretty serious problem for an island that depends on a really nice 7 Mile Beach. It's still beautiful, but it's obviously impacted at the moment. Additionally, we mentioned some of the other, like most storms or the world's weather patterns are driven by the differences in temperature. And when those temperatures are increasing or changing, so the weather responds accordingly. And hurricanes are notorious for generating much of their power from the heat in the oceans and the heat in the atmosphere. Obviously, a warmer ocean and a warmer atmosphere allows for much more intense storms to develop. So we're seeing around the island a lot of the implications of the storms we've had. Grace, did a lot of damage to the trees. Hurricane Ivan had, with the wind primarily from the north and the east, had a huge impact on the mangroves fringing the North Sound, and probably other areas too, but these are the ones I'm familiar with. Yeah. And we've seen quite a bit of retreat in the mangroves. They're literally the seaward edge, although they do a great job in buffering from storm events, they're still susceptible to them. And we saw a lot of retreat on the north-facing edges of the mangroves around the Sound that they still haven't recovered. Coupled with sea level rise, the water gets a little too deep for the mangroves to recover. So that's another area that, we just don't see the recovery along the edges in areas that we'd like that to happen. Lisa mentioned flooding, everywhere we go these days, as soon as it rains, everyone grinds to a halt with the traffic as a result of flooding. And again, more intense rainfall, bringing that on. The coral bleaching I mentioned. I think getting to a subject close to your heart, I'm sure, turtles. They are much like polar bears are the kind of like the flagship species of climate change in the Arctic. The problems with the Caribbean, turtles are really the kind of flagship identifying species. We know they're ancient species. They've been around for millions of years. They haven't changed much over those years. They're one of the few animals that use the temperature to determine the ratio. So when the eggs are born, the temperature determines whether there'll be female or male eggs. And that distribution in Cayman, we've been measuring through a recent study, we're showing it shifted. So 31 degrees apparently is the pivotal temperature. And above that, the hotter it gets, the more females you get in the nest. And we're already showing that of the 17 nests that we looked at last year, most of them were above 31 degrees, which suggests that the sex ratio of the turtles that are being released to the environment is being skewed towards more females. We need to understand a lot more about that. But that's just something that we're measuring on the ground. And we can talk more about that. We have a great study looking at that, and I'm sure the farmers well aware of keeping the balance right between the male and the female. So that's an area that climate change is having a direct impact. We're doing work on the grouper spawning aggregations around the island historically, and Little Cayman, we're really fortunate to be working closely with the Reef Environmental Education Foundation, with Scripps, and with Oregon State University. And we've been looking at the larvae that the grouper produce. They float at sea for 3 or 4 days, and during that time they don't feed. With the elevated temperatures, the amount that they develop has increased to the point that they turn into the next stage of the larvae, but they don't feed, and they haven't been able to feed, and it's looking like they're already very close to their thermal threshold. Hence, they reproduce at the coldest months, January and December, at the full moon and into February. But we're seeing increase in temperatures at that time beyond what would normally be the cool temperature for the year. And that we think is likely, possibly, to have really dire consequences for the recruitment, i.e. the baby fish that are being born into the system. They simply can't survive under the present elevated temperatures. So that's probably not something you'll notice on a day-to-day basis looking for fish larvae, but a couple of years from now, as the grouper population starts to decline again, you will start to see the implications there.
Wow. Well, yeah, it's important for people to understand that these are indicators of all the things that are going on that they don't see. Well, like you said, mangroves retreating, flooding. Those are just signs of deeper things happening as a result of climate change.
If I could have one more, another area that I think I have no scientific basis or measurements on this. I have discussed it with John at the Weather Service, but for me, as a child growing up in Cayman, nor'westers used to be a really great, exciting time. You got to put on your jeans and some warm clothes, go and play on the beach in the waves for a couple of days. It used to happen forever. But we just don't seem to have large nor'westers anymore. And whether that's an implications from changing climate, highly likely that the weather patterns have changed. You don't see those really strong fronts pushing down from the States anymore, but that's just something that anecdotally I think is attributed to climate change, the lack of strong nor'westers. And that also has an implication for 7 Mile Beach, which relies on the seasonal weather patterns for moving sand in terms of like the sand distribution along the beach. So yeah, I think there are a lot. If you really take time to look around, there are loads of subtle changes that have happened in Cayman that you can say, hey, yeah, that's a difference from the temperature a few years ago to what it is today.
Shauna, Tim, of course, mentioned turtles. What about the center? Have we seen anything that we can relate to that?
So at the center, we've definitely noticed a shift forward in terms of nesting. So we usually say that the green turtle nesting is between the months of May to October, but we have seen a gradual shift forward with some of our nests starting sometimes as early as January, sometimes as early as February. So I just wanted to know if you've seen a change in the nesting patterns of wild nesting turtles as well.
That's an excellent observation, and we would often rely on the turtle centre to say when your turtles are starting, we'd start to look out. But yes, on the beaches, we're seeing exactly that in the natural environment. Not only are we seeing them arriving earlier, we're actually seeing that the entire nesting season is lasting longer. Last year, we had still nesting in December, and then we had January hatches, which is unheard of. So yeah, the season itself is getting longer and longer. And if you imagine that temperature is the cue that they use to come here during the summer months, and it makes a lot of sense, the warmer ocean allowing for the season to start earlier and last longer. So yeah, it definitely has an implications for the local stocks that are and the nesting that's taking place.
And I mean, we only focus on the green sea turtle at Cayman Turtle Center. Is this a trend that's going across all 3 species of nesting turtle in the Cayman Islands?
So unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data on the hawksbill turtle. They are nesting here, but not in the numbers that allow us to make some meaningful interpretation. But certainly the loggerhead species that we're looking at, yes, the same implications. So typically in Cayman, the loggerheads arrive ahead of the green turtles, and we're seeing that now. But already this year, we have green turtles arriving during the kind of the peak of the loggerhead season. So yeah, it's affecting all species, as you might imagine.
Yeah. And you touched upon how the sex of the nest is determined by temperature. We usually use hot chicks, cool guys. So yeah, warmer temperatures, you get all or mostly female, cooler temperatures, all are mostly male. So we have known in the past that nests in Florida and also Australia have been emerging mostly as female. So it is understandable, but also a little bit upsetting that the same trend is continuing here in Cayman with most nests thought to be female.
Yeah, we're hoping, like I mentioned earlier, we have a Darwin, a UK-funded 3-year, nearly $500,000 to look at this problem, to look at how the climate is impacting turtles and what we can actually do about it. So we don't know enough at this stage because, as you can imagine, a lot of the beaches around the island have very different characteristics. So we want to try to get a handle on whether all of the nests are that on. And maybe this is a strategy for turtles. They've been around a long, long time. So they obviously adapted to changing temperatures because it has changed during the time that they've been on this planet. But whether these changes are happening too fast and in light of all the other anthropogenic, all the other human influences on turtles, this is likely to be the nail in the coffin. We don't know yet, but we're hoping to get an idea. And once we understand the problem, we should, in theory, be able to help address it and conserve it and mitigate it, and to continue the Cayman conservation success story that has happened. You know, obviously, green turtles have made a good recovery in Cayman, largely through the centre's intervention with the releases that they did in the early 80s. We're seeing those turtles come back now. Most people in Cayman understand that the turtles go to sea; they stay there for 20 to 30 years before they come back, so they're a long-lived species. But all of those efforts from the Conservation Centre back in the 80s is really paying off today. We're also seeing increases in the loggerheads, and that's primarily through just understanding the life cycle of these species, and we are able to introduce the appropriate regulations to protect the breeding population, which is what we need to do.
So even though we're celebrating sea turtles here coming back from the brink of extinction, they were considered functionally extinct, not enough to continue the wild population. And the numbers are increasing through conservation programs, but also the hard work of DOE monitoring and taking care of the wild turtle nests and populations. Even though we're celebrating the success, climate change is going to limit that. And if we don't get our hands on solving that issue or helping to address that issue, it's going to be a massive problem.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, turtles really live in all elements of climate change. They suffer from beach erosion, which takes away their nesting habitat. The increased temperatures affect their sex ratios. The seagrasses and the corals and the sponges that they feed on are all being impacted by the loss of reef diversity. So they're really at the forefront of all of the impacts, which is why they feature so heavily in our climate policy, because a lot about it is urgency and what is happening now, what are we seeing now? And literally, we are seeing the impacts on really a cultural icon of Cayman. So it's absolutely heartbreaking to see what's going on. But the good thing is that if we understand what these issues are, the policy, the climate change policy talks about adaptation and mitigation. We need the mitigation, obviously, to prevent the climate from changing. But if we can understand what's going on, and we can buy the time that we need to till the world gets a handle on kind of bringing climate change under some kind of control, once we understand that, we can work with these creatures, we can work with local management, conservation, and hopefully safeguard this species so that they'll be around for generations to come.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so true, Tim. Because these guys, like you said, they're flagship species. They represent our oceans. You see on all aspects of it. So yeah, conserving sea turtles is actually conserving the ocean, and climate change is a big part of that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we can delve a little bit more into the policy and so on. And hope Lisa can enlighten us with that. We're listening to Green Scene on Bobo 89.1 FM, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Did you know that turtles play an important role in ocean ecosystems? Turtles maintain healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs, providing key habitat for other marine life and helping to balance marine food webs and nutrient cycling. Learn more about our turtle friends at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a Cayman parrot at the Cayman Turtle Center. I was rescued and love my home here. Did you know our human friends at the center breed and raise Cayman parrots, the national bird of the Cayman Islands, then release them to live in the wild? Come visit me and my bird friends at Cayman Turtle Center.
Welcome back to the Green Scene, sponsored by the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center. My name is Gaddis Slop, and we're here with Ms. Lisa Wilson-McKenzie from the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, and Sir Tim Austin from the Department of Environment. And we've been discussing climate change. We talked a lot about the roles of the ministry and the Department of Environment in the government's approach to climate change. And we talked about some of the implications of climate change and what's happening here in Cayman, things that we can see that's going on, and the deeper reaching effects, not just what's on the surface, but what's happening below the surface. The thing is, the government has approached this by developing the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency and implementing a climate change policy. So what we're going to do is get into this policy. Lisa, can you give us some idea? What is the climate change policy? And why do we need it?
Sure. Thank you, Geddes. Yes, absolutely. So some people listening may recall that we had a draft climate change policy in 2011, and that was as a result of a substantial consultation process. It was all told about 4 years. We went through a series of workshops and national consultations within government as well as the private sector. But unfortunately, that policy remained in draft. Fast forward now to 2022, 2023. A lot has changed, as Tim and I and yourself have been discussing over the last few minutes. We're seeing definitely evidence of climate change now, even in those interim years. So a policy is definitely needed for us to be able to adequately address climate change impacts in the various different sectors that we talked about and the various different hazards that we also spoke about. So when last year we had a climate change risk assessment performed. Fortunately, we were able to again have the assistance of the UK government to fund that risk assessment. And as Tim mentioned, one of the highest scoring risks on that risk assessment was the impact to our nesting turtle population, our wild nesting turtle population. And that was only one of 50 risks identified. 50, yes. We had, of those 50, 18 risks that were considered severe. In other words, they were severe impacts to the country or to segments of the population or sectors of the economy or to the natural habitats and species that Tim spoke about earlier. We had also 16 risks that were identified as being moderate in terms of their implications for the country in various different ways, either to biodiversity and habitats or to society and economy. And then the remaining 16 were considered of low risk. Not that they were any less important, but in relation to the other two categories, they scored lower down on the scale, but still something for us to keep an eye on. So the climate change policy this time around, the draft 2023 to 2040 policy, actually has strategies, almost 100 strategies, that address those moderate and severe risks. So the 16 and the 18 that I spoke of. So that's still quite a big policy. And although it's a hefty document, it's about 58 pages, which we hope people will be able to go to www.gov.ky/climate change policy and look at the policy for us and feedback their comment on the policy at that same location, that same website. If you scroll down, you'll be able to click on a digital survey, Survey Monkey, and be able to feedback your information to us in terms of how you feel the policy addresses some of the risks that we spoke about, as well as answering, going through the survey and answering. I think it's about 20 questions. Or if you just want to feedback to us some general comments or concerns, you can do so by emailing climate@gov.ky. But the policy itself, I think it's very clear why we need it. We need a plan for the country, and the ministry, so named, with climate in it, needs to be able to have a guiding document. And this will be the primary guiding document, not just for the ministry, but for the ministry to be able to interact with its partners in government, as well as in the private sector, in academia, in media, at the NGO level, and obviously with entities such as yourselves that have a very critical role to play in the adaptation of our natural species to the impacts of climate change, which you've said that you're already seeing on a daily basis or an annual basis. So this policy will help guide some of that work, as well as help prioritize what we need to do, now. We have 3 time periods in the policy, 2023 to 2025, which will also correspond with this present government's budgetary cycle, 2025 to 2030, which will be the next time horizon, and then what we need to accomplish between 2030 and 2040. This is not to say that these strategies the actions itemized in these strategies won't be undertaken until such time, but that some things we might want to accomplish by that time frame, or at least start to see the results of, if there's been any, for example, investment in continuing research, such as the research that Tim discussed, that we might need to start now actioning as a result of that research, or any behavioral changes that we might be asking the public or households or businesses to start putting into effect, whether helping hands are needed in the form of incentives to help people do those various actions and be able to respond accordingly to climate change. So those types of measures are what's discussed in the policy and what we would like people to feedback to us on, to say whether they think that this is enough, we're not going far enough, or just whatever they feel to to give us information back on. I should probably just say at a higher level, and people will see this when they go to the document, that the vision for the policy is a climate resilient Cayman Islands that promotes and sustains vibrant communities, a thriving natural environment, and a robust economy where people can live their best lives now and for future generations. And in order to accomplish that vision, or at least set us on the right path for that vision to come to fruition, there are three main goals of the policy. The first one is to reduce Cayman's vulnerability, which we've spoken a lot about already, and enhance our resiliency to climate change. The second goal is to promote sustainable, low or zero carbon economic activity wherever possible. And the third is to establish a governance framework for climate action, which is future focused, fair to all, and accountable and transparent. And in order to achieve, we hope, those goals within the 17 to 20 year time frame of the policy, which will be reviewed on a 5-year basis, if not before. There are several policy objectives that sit in 7 sort of focus areas, and I'll just read them off, but you can see them in the policy. One is, a very important one is interwoven equity. The next one is a robust economy. The third is a livable built environment. The fourth policy objective is healthy and resilient communities. The fifth is resilient infrastructure networks. The sixth is harmony with nature, which we've spoken a lot about today. And the seventh is integration and coordination, and that's across government as well as between government, the private sector, NGOs, academia, etc.
Wow, that's certainly very comprehensive. And to me, it reaches across everything and everybody. Right? Because as you mentioned earlier, climate change just affects everything. Everything, whether you think it does or not. But it's good to know that the government has taken the time to go through such a comprehensive research and program to set this thing up. I'm sure implementing it is not going to be easy, but it's a start, and it sounds like a good start.
That's so true. And we've had some feedback to date where some of the strategies may speak a little bit more like action items, such as like that would be in an implementation plan, or the feedback that we've received have been perhaps less on the strategies and more on, well, how do you intend to action this strategy? I have some ideas being XYZ. So at this stage, we would welcome both of those types of comments on the strategies themselves as well as what you think some of those implementing actions might be, because we're already starting to draft that implementation plan as we're taking in public feedback on the strategy. So we would welcome any and all comments on this, and hopefully at some point in July, when we take the amended policy to Cabinet, having incorporated all of the public's comments on the draft policy that's out for consultation at the moment, that we will also be able to start working on the implementation plan more specifically, and be able to, again, put that out to the public to say, hey, have we got this right? Do you think that this implementation plan matches up with the strategy that we asked you to comment on earlier in the summer? So we hope that maybe in a month's time or two, we might be sitting here again, maybe discussing some of those items with you.
Oh, excellent. Just quickly, can you just repeat where the public can make their comments?
Absolutely. The public can make their comments before June 30th at www.gov.ky/climate change policy.
Excellent. One thing you mentioned that I think might be just take a time to expand on a little bit. You said one of the targets was to reduce carbon or carbon free. Can somebody tell me what's the big deal about carbon? You hear people talk about it all the time. Why carbon? Why not? They talk about global warming and all kind of thing, but what does carbon have to play in it?
So carbon or carbon dioxide in its various forms is the primary greenhouse gas that is driving human-induced climate change. There are other greenhouse gases that are important that, in fact, the Cayman Islands reports on through the United Kingdom to the Climate Change Secretariat, who is sort of the global entity that all countries report their greenhouse gases to if they've signed up to the convention. But carbon or carbon dioxide is the important one because it lasts the longest for the most part in the atmosphere. It has a very, very long half-life. But other greenhouse gases are important too, such as methane, which is typically the main source of that is waste management, for example, like our landfill or our manure management, the certain species of livestock that's reared all over the world. They produce methane depending on how they digest their food, cattle in particular. But carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels, from deforestation, that's the primary sources of carbon dioxide and the chemical reaction that it has in the atmosphere. A certain level of the atmosphere trap gases in the atmosphere and create this what they call a greenhouse gas effect. Now, the greenhouse gas effect is a natural occurring effect. If we didn't actually have that naturally occurring all across the Earth would be much, much cooler, much colder actually, and we probably wouldn't be able to be very comfortable sitting here today. But the issue is that as a result of the injection of more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, I think Tim mentioned earlier, since about the 1800s, that we've been, as a global society and a civilization, being spewing these hydrocarbons into the atmosphere, that has accelerated the greenhouse gas effect, and it has created what we call the enhanced greenhouse gas effect. So more heat trapping of these gases in the atmosphere, creating what we all call global warming. So that's the other side of the coin to climate change. There is global cooling that takes place on a natural cycle as well, but also enhanced by things like volcanoes. Whenever we have a volcanic eruption around the world, volcanoes generally tend to have a cooling effect. And the aerosols that are poured out into the atmosphere as a result of volcanoes and other types of industrial activity. But for the most part, global warming is associated with the warming side of climate change. And CO2 or carbon dioxide, carbon emissions are the main factor in all of that. So that's why in this policy and probably most policies around the world, climate action typically talks about reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that we're putting into our atmosphere, but also that we're putting into our oceans as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you for clarifying that. In other words, carbon dioxide is part of that blanket that's keeping us a little too warm.
That's a very good analogy. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we've learned a lot about the climate change policy, and we encourage people to go on that website and make their comments. At least educate yourself about what it's about. And it does sound like a lot of doom and gloom going on, but there are some things that we can do to help. So we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what we can do as people here in the Cayman Islands to help implement our climate change policy and to do our own part to help combat climate change. You're listening to The Green Scene on Bobo 89.1 FM, and we'll be right back. Hi, this is Geddes from the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center.
Hi, this is Shona from the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center.
Hey, this is Wendy from the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center.
We're inviting you.
Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Did you know that turtles play an important role in ocean ecosystems? Turtles maintain healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs, providing key habitat for other marine life and helping to balance marine food webs and nutrient cycling. Learn more about our turtle friends at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a Cayman parrot at the Cayman Turtle Center. I was rescued and love my home here. Did you know our human friends at the center breed and raise Cayman parrots, the national bird of the Cayman Islands, then release them to live in the wild? Come visit me and my bird friends at Cayman Turtle Center.
We're back to the green scene. My name is Geddes, and we've been discussing climate change with Lisa from the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency and Mr. Tim Austin from the Department of Environment. We went through a lot, so I hope you tune back in the earlier session so you can hear all the information we went through. We discussed the climate change policy. We talked about climate change itself and all the implications and what it means. And for this segment, it seemed, in the earlier segments, it seemed like we were talking about a lot of doom and gloom. But it's not all doom and gloom because there are things that we can do. What are some of the sustainable practices or activities that some people can do to help mitigate the effects of climate change here in the Cayman Islands? So maybe, Tim, you want to just take a stab at that?
I like to say, I guess there are so many things you can do, but I think the most immediate priority this week and into the beginning of July is to get hold of this policy. Have a read of it. Make sure you understand it. Make sure your concerns are addressed in it. We need obviously support for the policy moving forward. So yeah, get online, have your say, make sure it's fit for purpose. But then on a day-to-day basis, that dreaded carbon, that's what we need to focus on looking long-term. So we need to reduce, people say reduce your carbon footprint, all kinds of fancy terms like let's go net zero. So things that you use that really don't actually result in a net carbon being released to the environment. So there's loads of ways you can do that. Turn down that AC, get more efficient energy fittings, renewable energy, look at solar panels, look at wind power, look at all of the various technologies that are out there that are being developed to help people do this. Yes, they're costly, but the beauty of a lot of this stuff, this idea is that you might think, oh, it's for climate change, it doesn't exist, or people, you know, the naysayers out there, the people that don't want to believe in it. Even if you don't believe in climate change, what the policy and what is being presented here is all about sustainable living. It's good for the future regardless. Often say to people, you know, climate change is not happening. I say, well, okay, what in this policy would you do differently? What would you not do? And if climate change didn't exist, what would you not do? None of this. You do, like, all of it is relevant to just living better with the environment that we're in, and ultimately that benefits everybody. But on a day-to-day basis, yeah, sustainable living is all about the way to go, and it helps to reduce that carbon footprint and helps our reliance on fossil fuels, and we can move forward in terms of mitigating the amount of carbon. There is so much more I can do, but I don't want to spend the rest of the show. But yeah, there's a lot out there, a lot of things. So I think education is probably the biggest part of this. We need people to know that they can make a difference. Yes, we're a small island, but we're also one of the kind of more vulnerable nations. You know, low-lying small islands are really susceptible to climate change. So we need to lead by example. We can't be telling the rest of the world they've got to change what they're doing without setting that example ourselves.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, our audio has to match our video, so to speak. Yeah, and yeah, I remember a video of, I can't remember which nation it was, but one of the South Pacific nations where the representative made a speech or an appeal to the United Nations, standing waist deep in the water, talking about this is what's happening to my country. And Cayman isn't that much higher, so it's something that can easily happen to us. You know, people definitely need to make informed decisions. So, Lisa, is there anything that the ministry is putting out to help people learn more?
Absolutely, but I would just say before answering to that I believe it was the same nation that, to put a finer point on it, actually held one of their cabinet meetings underwater, just to say, that in a generation or so, they could be underwater.
Talk about making a point.
Talking about making a point, but I think things like that have great visual impact. And speaking of visual impact, yes, the ministry has put out a video. It's about a 2-minute video with all imagery from Cayman for the most part on climate change, just a very basic video on climate change, the impacts that we have been feeling as well as what we will continue to face. If we, don't do something about it as a part of a global citizenry, as well as on a national level here. And you can find that probably on our YouTube channel, government's YouTube channel, as well as the ministry's Facebook page and Instagram. But you can also go to www.gov.ky/sustainability, which is our ministry page, and be able to find that type of information there, as well as feedback to the climate change policy through that means. But the other thing that I would say, following on from what the examples that Tim was giving, is that some of these things people are already doing now in the country, thankfully, particularly the uptake of renewable energy in its various forms, whether it's solar panels on their homes, which government has for quite some time been able to provide incentives for in the sense of duty reductions on those renewable energy technologies, and working with the utilities to be able to put more renewable energy onto the grid for homes and for businesses, but also in terms of the transport sector, which is another area of greenhouse gases that's quite high for us. And we have quite a per capita carbon footprint that's relatively high as a small island, because of our standard of living, because of what the types of service-based economy that we followed here in Cayman for the last several decades. And so electric vehicles is another option to look at, which government has also been providing incentive for in terms of, again, duty concessions. So these are the types of things that are already taking place and are already addressed in the policy, but perhaps in terms of revisiting some of these areas and seeing if we can further incentivize, whether it's through our ministry or through a partner ministry or a partner department in government or with the private sector, as it relates to those specific activities. And those are just, a few examples. But as Tim said, really looking at our day-to-day activities and just taking stock as to what am I doing right now? Is this a sustainable activity? If there is something that I'm about to throw away that could be recycled, should I not put it in the recycling bin or a separate bin and get it to the recycling depot instead of throwing it into my garbage or my refuse that will end up in the landfill, for example? It's just those types of things to take stock to see where we might be able to make better choices on an individual basis, on a household basis, and where possible, if there is a government program there or an NGO out there that is addressing some of this, just to become better informed about that and be able to get them to help you make a better choice going forward for your family into the future.
Yeah, excellent. It's all about sustainability, and yes, education is a big part of it. Talking about education, Shauna, I'm going to bring you in on this. The Turtle Center, I know some of the programs that we do, the education programs we do, we also talk about being sustainable.
Yeah, we definitely do. One of the main ones we touch upon it the most, I would say, is our shark talk down by the viewing glass that we do before every single shark feeding. We just talk about the importance of sharks because they are very important to our marine environment. I jokingly call them the superheroes of the ocean, but that's exactly what they are. And they're in a lot of trouble, but there are some very simple things we can do every single day to help them. And one of the best things we can do is by eating sustainable seafood. Now, for us in Cayman, we have a very close connection with seafood in our diets. I'm sure Tim could talk a little bit more about seafood, but just making sure you're eating sustainable seafood here in the Cayman Islands. And sustainable seafood just means seafood that's been taken or farmed in a way that doesn't damage the environment. So make sure you're following the seasons like conch season and lobster season, and that you're also following the limits during those seasons. But if you're someone here, there's something called Cayman Sea Sense, and you can Google it, and that shows you the sustainable seafood options here in the Cayman Islands. But if you want a little bit more of a wider look, there's also an app you can get on your phone called Seafood Watch that's put on by the Monterey Bay Aquarium in California, and that breaks down sustainable seafood as a stoplight system. So green's good, yellow you might have to do a bit more research, and red, if you're touching it, it's probably not sustainable. But just making sure you make these options every single day helps the environment massively. Obviously, if you were going vegan or vegetarian, you'd have a much better impact for the environment, also reducing methane production in the long run as well. But definitely just by making these simple choices, you can help the environment.
Yeah, so it's all about sustainability and doing what we can. And the point is you want to make is that no small deed is too small. At the Turtle Center, we also have another saying about we want everybody to think about picking up 3 pieces of plastic a day. Just 3 pieces. And, that's almost 1,000 pieces of plastic a year if you stick to that. And the point is just to build that sense of environmental responsibility. You might not pick up 3 pieces of plastic every day, but the next time you might pick up 6. And bit by bit, we can make an impact, especially if it spreads around. And so we've been talking about climate change. It's been very informative. We know that fortunately the Cayman Islands has a whole ministry dedicated to this issue, and working with the Department of Environment and other NGOs, we have a good chance, I think, to make an impact. But just one thing you mentioned, Lisa, you said that Cayman has our biggest carbon source, I guess maybe the word is our traffic. But in the global side of things, Cayman is probably just literally a speck in the ocean when it comes to climate change, to producing that carbon emissions. But so why should people still worry about it so much? Even though we just, as compared to China, for example, we're not producing that much. But should people still be concerned about that?
Actually, our biggest source of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions is our energy production. And transportation is second. And I think either land use change or waste management, they sort of come in third and fourth almost equally. But it's important for us to be able to look at this per capita carbon footprint, as Tim rightly said, from a global perspective, that we can't expect to say to China or even to the UK and any other country out there that's producing more emissions than we are, but perhaps not on a per capita basis, and expect them to implement some of the sustainability measures on an individual basis or a national basis that we've been speaking about, if we're not prepared to do so ourselves, if we're not prepared to do what is necessary to lessen the entire contribution to the issue of climate change and of continued global warming. So I think just from that perspective alone, it's important to realize that it's a global problem that requires a global solution, and we play a part in that. But I would also say that, or to reiterate what Tim says, some of the things that are important to look at in terms of reducing our carbon emissions are just pure sustainability concepts, things that we would want to do anyway in the absence of climate change, just to lead a more sustainable lifestyle and to have a more robust economy. that's less likely to be impacted by any other types of economic shocks. And climate change is just one other factor to consider in all of those choices that we're making at either an individual level, a household level, or businesses or as a country. So it's important to, I think, first and foremost, think of it as a sustainability issue, as an issue for continued environmental progress and socioeconomic progress in the country, and that climate change, if it continues to go unaddressed, just basically compounds a lot of the issues that we've already been speaking about here today. And why would we want to do that if there are other options out there for us to choose on a daily basis, or other solutions that we can look towards to make our lifestyles or to be able to maintain the lifestyle and the quality of life that we've been accustomed to in the country going forward for many generations to come.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you, and I think if I remember right, we read out the mission statement of the ministry, and I think that addresses exactly what you said there. It's more about sustainability, and climate change is just the impetus for living a better life. Yeah. So guys, thank you so much for being here on the show. Before we leave, if people wanted more information, can you just tell me where can they contact? Like Lisa in the ministry, where can they get more information? You just bring that up one more time.
Sure. More information about the policy itself and the link to the feedback form is at www.gov.ky/climate change policy. If you would like to drop us a note and with any concerns that you have about climate change or the ministry's approach to addressing climate change, the climate change policy itself, you can email us at climate@gov.ky.
And Tim, for the Department of Environment, where can they contact for more information?
So, we're happy to discuss anything to do with the natural environment, anything that is on your mind related to the policy or just environment issues generally. We're easy to track down. You can email us at doe@gov.ky, pretty easy to remember, doe@gov.ky. And then if you want to find out more about what we're doing before you call us, you can check out our website, which is www.doe.ky. As I say, don't worry about remembering any of these things. You just drop in climate change policy Cayman and it pops straight up. I did that today.
Oh,
or DOE, Department of Environment Cayman, and all the contact information comes straight up.
Oh yeah, you can
Google these
it.
days is a good way. But yeah, doe@gov.ky if you want to send us an email, or doe.ky at the website.
All right, excellent. And Shauna, just to complete the triangle. So at the Cayman Turtle Center, people want to find out information. Where can they contact us?
Yeah, so if you want any more information from us at the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center, you can email info@turtle.ky, whether you just want more information about our programs there, or if you want to perhaps volunteer on some of our programs as well.
Okay, well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. We've been discussing climate change with Lisa Wilson McKenzie from the Ministry of Resiliency, Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, and Mr. Tim Austin from the Department of Environment. And if you missed the rest of it, you can still check it out on our YouTube channel, and the Cayman Turtle Center's YouTube channel. All the Bobo shows, all the Green Scene shows are on that channel, and you can look back and get more information there. Thank you for listening to The Green Scene. Join us next week on Bobo 89.1 FM at 11 a.m. for another episode. At the Cayman Turtle Center, we still have some things going on. Our Kids Camp Shelby is back for the summer. You can find out some more information and register at www.campshelby, that's camp, SHELLBY.com. Our evening hatchling releases are back, and we're offering a very special experience every Thursday in the months of July and August. You can check out our website or social media pages for more information, and follow us on social media for more updates and happenings at the center. Join us next week when our guests will be Mr. Jerris Miller and Ms. Susie Soto from the Cayman Maritime Heritage Foundation. See you next time on Green Scene.